we got to be accountable. We got to get back to accountable government. And I think that all too often when our voices get discouraged and when they don't show up, then that allows folks to go on overdrive in their own agendas. And the truth of the matter is, there are too many people in our town with agendas, and that doesn't necessarily mean positive outcomes for the people that
Come
need
on,
it the most.
speaking that truth now. Come on.
Are you
So
are you
just so I got it clear, you are running this upcoming election as well.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up. I came in late in 22, came in after the primary, so we had an uphill battle. I am an independent, and I have been since 2012, and that's another story. But the reality was is that I came in late in 22, and with the indication of delivering our dear mayor the understanding that your replacement has arrived. The community's voice will be heard, and it will prevail. We will wake them up, and so yes, I declared exploratory about 2 months ago so that we could come out on the ground, have conversations, and just understand that the matters that matter the most to our people are matters that they need to understand that I care about. As a mental health advocate, I understand the stigma around mental health, but when we change the conversation around mental wellness, now we can get more people to the table because no one wants to wear that label. And as a city, we haven't done the best job at allocating our resources properly. So absolutely, I will be returning, and it's my intentions of running in 2026. I imagine I'll declare candidacy sometime right around the spring in order that we can begin collecting signatures. But before we did that, I wanted to show up and have opportunity to talk to our citizens across these 8 wards because there's such a divide. And the reality is that we really all care about the same things. None of us want to live in unsafe communities. We really do want our children to win and graduate to higher advanced understandings. But the reality is we have an 81 times wealth gap. And if we're going to do something about that, we have to be intentional. And to be intentional, our people have to believe that it's about them. And so as a local, I'm coming forward because in a lot of these communities that I'm in and out of, we're having the confidential conversations, but their lives are not changing. And that is the importance of reconnecting them to the importance of their vote. And so I take on the responsibility of coming back to reunite our citizens around the issues that matter. And I'll take it on the chin as I have been there frustrated because somebody that looks like me came before me and made promises to them and they've broken them. And the reality is that we've got to build the trust back in our communities. And I don't have a problem doing that. I work in a field that requires trust. And so, yes, I'm coming in 2026 in order that we can remove this mayor so that we can get the people believing in proper leadership again.
Can I ask you, Dr. Hamilton, just the contrast? So the mayor loves to bulldoze tent encampments where people who can't afford to live in their neighborhoods but want to stay nearby, or just, even if they're transient or whatever, folks are living in tents in freezing cold weather, and they've already been displaced out of their homes. Now they're getting displaced again by bulldozers. Tell us about your peer initiative, for the homeless, from your perspective. How you see how the mayor does with our homeless right now, and people who are unhoused. What's the contrast for you?
Let me tell you, and I'm glad you asked that question because in early 2021, we started recognizing the challenges that we were having in our homeless matters. And the reality is that we manage a $21 billion budget, right? And a lot of what we have done and have operated has been trusting that the monies allocated have been properly done so. What we see with this mayor bulldozing the encampments and the reality of playing down the real problem. The point in count, just to make reference, the point in time count for our homeless citizens in 23 was right around 4,700, 4,900. Yeah, when they did the count in 24, just a year later, we doubled that. We more than doubled that number to the point that we are somewhere around 9,700. I wrote some numbers down for you
That's
guys, but
sickening.
the reality is that we know from our statistical data collection that our homelessness has more than doubled in a year's time. When I look at monies allocated for agencies that we have not held accountable to our homeless population, I believe that we've got to do root cause work. And as a mental health advocate, I'm a big believer in root cause. So for me, what I would do and what would contrast, I would first want to audit where our dollars and our tax dollars are being spent. I would
Mhm.
first want to understand the monies coming in from the federal government, that
Yes.
find out how they're properly being allocated, because there are a handful of agencies, and I can get started telling you, that
Mm.
are just been allowed to be too big to fail.
Come
And the
on with that truth now. Come on with that truth.
reality is that they're failing our citizens. And so I
Mm.
don't believe that as a district and as tax-paying citizens who have constantly watched the decline in our social service programs, I don't believe that we've been properly afforded a transparent audit of this
Mm.
administration's abilities. And so we end up following their narrative. I happen to believe we get more than enough money from the federal government.
Mhm.
Our DCHA, as we speak, the head of the department, the director, has mentioned that they have 3 policing agencies on their doorstep, to include the FBI. Now, when in the world would the FBI need to be on the doorstep of a housing agency? In addition to that, we know that the voucher waiting list for over a decade, that number has spanned over
Two.
40,000.
2 decades. Because I was on that list.
In 22,
I'm
we
still
had
on it.
in 22 we had a count of about 40,000, and in 24, 2 years later, we're at approximately 40,570. So that tells me 2 things. Number one, I've got Washingtonians whose economic status is not changing over decades. That's a
Mhm.
problem. And number two, why in the world would the number be going up instead of down?
Down. Right.
I happen to believe that we need to audit the allocation of the monies. We need to bring relationships to the table in order that we end them. We need to provide access to appropriate resources. And then we need to begin to understand the true definition of what we're calling homeless. Because I've got homeless people walking up to shelters and not being able to be administered if they can't prove that they're homeless. And when our citizens have to start proving that they're
Right.
homeless to be able to find somewhere to sleep in the depth of winter, then I say our systems need to be checked. And so my
Talk about
answer
it.
to you, yeah, my answer to you is that there's a major overhaul that needs to happen, and change makes people nervous. But as tax-paying citizens, we're supposed to be demanding to understand where our monies are going, and we're not. And when we don't vote, that makes it doubly challenging. So
Mhm.
I challenge this mayor to allow us to audit her books. And since I don't believe she'll do that before her term is up, then we just need to remove her in order that we can reestablish higher standards in our
Mhm.
governing and make sure that our citizens' needs come first.
Amen. Clap, clap, clap.
Amen.
What you talking about?
You know, you're talking about accountability with the housing, but I feel like the mayor has fell short in a few areas, and so I just wanted your opinion. This past uh oh, not showing the way I wanted to show, but this past yesterday, I believe actually, the council, the new, should I say, the new council, including my Ward 7 council member Wendell Felder, finally met, and they finally approved the protection to continue protection against inflation, basically a rent cap.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on the council in its relationship with housing? And what are your thoughts on a rent cap, expanding that?
Well, first and foremost, I think that the rent cap provisions are, necessary to make certain, because the cost of living in DC is so high, especially to rent. So I do believe that we need to act responsibly and make sure that the caps are appropriate. However, what I will say to you, when you ask me the question of the council's relationship to our housing agency, I think that is very reactive, and I would like to see them be more proactive. What am I speaking of? For example, we only have one resource to help folks that are facing eviction, but the reality is that we have a slew of affordable housing vendors who are not necessarily maintaining the properties to housing code. And so what we have been challenging our council to do, I met with Mr. Mendelson the first week in December because we presented Mr. Robert White something called the HART legislation. What I saw happening is that our citizens who were up in arms of living with mold, living with rodents, living with electrical issues, no heat in the winter, no AC in the summer, just consistency of housing code violations. The reality of the council not challenging the fact that many of these citizens were on subsidy. So why would we continue to pour money into housing vendors who don't maintain their properties to code? And so when I say they're acting reactionary, they're forcing citizens to follow a system that is not protecting their well-being in their living environments. And so they get forced into these landlord-tenant processes that they have to keep going back and forth to court to prove that these violations exist, and they have no protections from being evicted. I don't believe that housing code vendors who are not properly maintaining the properties should be allowed to evict citizens, nor do I believe that they should be allowed to continue to receive housing subsidies when their properties are not up to code. And it's very, very irresponsible to come out and say that citizens aren't paying their rent, and that's why the ERAP is a problem. The truth of the matter is we have a problem with accountable housing code violations, and the council is responsible for stepping in to do something. So we presented them with the HART Act, which would allow housing vendors to be penalized as long as they keep these violations in place. We also want to call for the interruption of their monies from federal subsidies or otherwise until these properties are brought to code. So I feel that our council's relationship and our mayor's relationship with our housing agency has been very reactionary. We've had problems with slumlords in our city for quite some time, and too many district citizens are living beneath the standards that none of those leaders would live. We invited them to go themselves and live in these communities, and maybe they would be more propelled to act.
You know what? I said that, Miss Rhonda. I said that like 15 years ago. I said, you remember that show, Wife Swap? I said, okay, we should do a housing swap. All of them Richies that ain't never stayed in the hood and don't know exactly what we go through from day to day, they need to swap their lives out with us, and they need to stay there for at least 3 months.
Yeah.
Stay there for at least, because they're not really going to see it in 30 days.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's important.
And we're not talking about, I'm sorry, I got to say this because it was offensive to me. We're not talking about, this is my brother, and I'm defending him now, but we're not talking about what my brother Trayon White did in Potomac Gardens when he came in my neighborhood and called himself sleeping outside for a night to experience what we were going through. We're talking about really experiencing how we live day to day, not a show for camera and not an act.
I'm so glad you pointed that out. So let's talk about that. As citizens of the district watching what we've been dealing with, we've been being handled, right? Whenever it was necessary to get a headline out that said that they were on top of the problem, then obviously that was what they were headstrong to go and do. But just as you mentioned, sleeping outside one night doesn't change the reality for families that sleep there 365 days of the year. And since you brought up Mr. Trayon White, let's talk about that, because the reality for many of these communities that we saw dealing with these housing code violations, they were existing in Ward 8. And so when we look at the ongoing support for Mr. White and any of the other council members, I say let's have a fair conversation, because the reality is there are too many families who went without on his watch. And when you ask what is he supposed to do, well, he's supposed to make sure that there are not landlords that are benefiting on the backs of his constituents when their living environments are in jeopardy and have been for quite some time. The reality is that as a public official and elected leader, you don't get to pick and choose which issues you want to address, especially when the issues that you're not addressing places so many of your constituents in danger. So I want to have real life conversations, because our children are being impacted by it. And as you mentioned in the beginning of your narrative, the mayor has failed in more than just the housing arena, in my opinion. Our healthcare issues are an issue. The reality that DC ranks high in sex trafficking, in the top 3, and a lot of people don't realize that. It's because they're picking and choosing what information they put before us. We have so many citizens that could live a better quality of life if we just had a mayor that didn't have an agenda that fed the developers over the people's issues.
Right.
Yeah, and so there's a lot that we have to address. Our outcomes of our children. We many people are probably going to be disappointed to hear me call it out, but we pay for a two-headed snake in our education system. We pay for a charter model and we pay for a public model, and we're still not winning the war on advancing our children to higher educational and career understandings. And let's face it, $17.50 an hour is not going to create homeowners unless we're intentional about how we're going to approach these matters. And so I believe that we are excited to have the opportunity to bring our home team home, the RFK Stadium project. But let's remember and let's watch this mayor's pattern of behavior. When we saved the Ted Leonis deal, she came after SNAP right afterwards, and then pulled the contract from the DC circulator workers after awarding them a 5-year understanding. So what we understand this mayor's mode of operation to be is that to save these sports franchises, possibly our low-income and working class families come under attack from the resources being pulled back. So this is the danger of us not voting, because we're not vocal enough to force this conversation in the court of public opinion to win back the trust of so many of our citizens who have been ignored. So yes, this mayor has failed in many ways, and it's our responsibility to hold her accountable.
Amen. Amen.
And I haven't even talked about the mental health, because I'm the mental health advocate. So that's just the elephant in the room. That's a whole nother show. But just know that we definitely intend to reform much of what we see not working, and it starts with auditing our money to find out what they've been doing with it.
And I totally agree with you on that, Dr. Rhonda. I'm a mental health advocate myself, mainly because I experienced postpartum depression when I had my first child, and I didn't know what that was, what I was feeling, and I had to seek some help for it. And fast forward into 2020, well, actually 2019 is when I actually said this. At the end of December, I was saying that we needed more mental health care workers, and then the pandemic shut the whole world down, and next thing you know, suicide rates are up.
Absolutely.
What was the other thing? They were saying in the news that there weren't enough therapists to cover the amount of people that needed services. So as a person who deals with mental health issues and have dealt with them for 3 decades.
Mhm.
I fight for the people who are like me that don't have a voice and they feel like, oh well, you know, the labels. They don't want to speak up because of the label. Look, I
Yeah.
told them, I said, stick them labels on me like bumper stickers, baby, and I'm gonna wear them. Okay, I'm gonna
God
show
bless
you. I'm gonna show you what mental health look like. I make this look good.
Absolutely, you do. And thank you for your word, and thank you for your work. And absolutely, you know, in low income and marginalized communities, the last thing we want to do is to have a label stuck to us, like you said. But the truth of the matter is that we've got to normalize the conversation. And the way we do that is we help people understand what the true definition of mental health is. Because for far too long, people associated mental health with institutionalized care,
Right.
with being in front of a doctor with a white coat. When the truth of the matter is, you come out of a relationship the wrong way, and you can be dealing with some depression or some after effects. You know, there's trauma in our lives. There's so much.
You know what, Miss Rhonda, girl, you got me over here flailing my arms to Jesus. You got me hugging myself and rocking back and forth, girl. I swear you.
Yeah, you know, we go quiet as a community when we need to be talking and speaking out. It's therapeutic to tell your story, but a lot of times we feel a little embarrassed or we worried about people making fun. Look, we are dying. We are dying much sooner than we need to be, just because of something as basic as education. You know, proper access to resources that will change your life. If you leave people to live in the same cycles that don't get them anywhere and make them feel lesser than, then you contribute to an early death. And in DC, we have a lot of low-income citizens that are impacted by low death realities. And we've got to do something about it, because our children are going to inherit these cycles.
Yes. And you know, when you said that, it brought back this haiku that I used to say. I came up with this in 2010. I said, without a struggle, there is no story. Without a story, there is no testimony. And without a testimony, others won't know how good God can be. Y'all better come on here.
You know, I feel you, sis. And I'll just say this really briefly. You got to go through to get through.
Come on now. You're going to have me preaching.
I'm about to kick a foot out like the Rock.
Yeah.
Charles S. Dutton, you remember when you kicked that foot out? I'm
Before we move on, I want to pay some bills and acknowledge some sponsors that we finally are able to get on board. Shout out to K&C Sparkles Catering Services. This is K&C's menu and contact information. They're on social media. The food is good. Specifically, I can account for the banana pudding. This is my favorite dessert.
Nice.
But this is a small DC business and a very, very awesome young Black woman who has just been taking things by storm, and I really am proud of her, and she is really upgraded. I remember when she first started. So if you can, be sure to look up K&C Sparkles on social media. There's the contact information again. Also, give her a call and check out some of this good food. I mean, this is home cooked food. You would think that you got it from South Carolina, North Carolina, somewhere.
That's awesome. You know, I love our small business owners in DC. We have over 75,000, and what many people don't realize is that our small business core are employing roughly half our worker force, 48%. And so we've got to do better to empower our small business folks. And many wealthy, independent folks are self-employed individuals. And so there's so much that we can do as a nation's capital to be an example. And I'm so excited to be able to have these kinds of conversations, because we got to bring our people from out the shadows. We must.
Yes. And Ms. Rhonda, I'm glad you brought that up, because I am one of the small business owners in DC. I own Hyler Emergency Preparedness, which I actually worked with some people to get the street vendors of 14th Street ready for the COVID pandemic. I've helped people get ready for the floods that happen here in DC when we get heavy storms or rains. I'm a woman of many talents, but the main things I focus on are emergency preparedness, being a doula, a DC notary, and a wedding officiant. And
I love hearing that. I just love hearing that. You are a powerhouse. I love that you're offering the doula services, because obviously there's another failed area that we are facing in our healthcare in terms of giving birth in the city. Whether it's giving birth or trauma east of the river, you don't want to be caught needing healthcare services. And so there's a lot that we have to address, and small business owners such as yourself are helping us to bridge the gap where we're failing. I am an insurance broker. I was a former real estate broker. And what I understand about insurance is that most wealthy people used insurance as an introduction to that. And that goes back to us needing to educate and support our small business owners and our citizens so that you have the same accesses. There's something called the Secure Act 2.0, where small businesses have to offer what they call retirement plans, pre-tax and retirement plans to employees. And it gives the small business owners an opportunity to gain a credit when doing so and being penalized if you don't. So there are conversations that we must have, lady, in order that we can secure the work that you're already doing, and then make so that you are a resource to bring other citizens into the fold. And we're going to do that. We're going to do it because there's no reason why we should not already be a strong nation's capital of independent business owners and progressive tax-paying citizens. There are conversations we're having that we should not be dealing with, such as people sleeping in the street, not getting access to proper health care in 2025. So much so that the impending president says he's coming here to clean us up, and we're supposed to believe that in a 45-minute meeting between him and Bowser, that all of a sudden all is good. No. We must stand up.
Speaking of the things that the mayor, that we feel like that has been shortcoming. I hate to cut you off, but we try to keep it to an hour per show. I just wanted your opinion on this. I know that I heavily criticized it the first mayoral election, and it's just getting done. This new council took the snow day actually, and approved the Washington Teachers Union contract. We know that the first contract was approved terribly late. It showed no appreciation for our teachers. In fact, it included back pay for our teachers because they hadn't been getting paid properly. And this is a new unprecedented. Usually the contracts are about 3 years. This one is 5 years. So we think that the council and the mayor has turned over a new leaf when it comes to respecting our teachers union. What would you have done differently? How would you have handled this over these past 6 years of negotiations? And also, how would you retain teachers? We have a huge problem retaining teachers, and not just teachers, but as you talk about mental health, we have a huge problem maintaining mental health professionals. So what would be your plan for those two areas?
Absolutely. And as a mental health advocate, in the absence of knowing or having someone admit, we look at behaviors, because behaviors tell the story. And so when we look at this mayor, isn't it interesting that the teachers' contracts have been a consistent theme, whether it's prior to the elections or right after the elections? And it makes you wonder, a mayor who can pull together a $600 million net, because it's not just about the $515 million that went to Leonis, but also the tax breaks, the $87 million million in tax breaks of DC taxpayer money. So it makes you wonder why it is that she can come through and save these $600 million transactions, but not do something as smart as acknowledge and properly take care of our teaching population in a city that struggles with truancy and minimal mental health resources. So I'm happy to see that the council has finally come around. But the truth of the matter is, Michael, to go back to what I said before, I'd like to see this council get to a proactive understanding instead of reacting. We're always celebrating something that should have already been done. And guess what? As we saved the teachers' contract, we had December 31st be the last day of the circulator service. And I'm going to keep speaking on that because they were awarded a 5-year contract only to find out a few months later that their jobs were ending. And so again, I want an audit. I want to understand why so many working class citizens in the district have to continuously feel that they're under attack. And the fact that we can't retain proper teachers and teaching populations to help teach our citizens says more about how we've handled them professionally as a whole. Those environments are challenging. You know, citizens that need mental health and don't have those services, households that are sending kids to school that don't have any heat or hot water. You know, there's a big challenge in our city to address core issues. And when you don't address core issues, then we find ourselves chasing the issues. So of course it's a great thing that the council stepped up, but they have so many things that they still need to step up on. We're just not in front of it, we're behind it. And again, this mayor manages a $21 billion budget. It's time to understand where our dollars and cents are going. Because we know yeah, well, you know, I'd like to get away from speculating. I'd like to just know. You know,
I know for sure because she stole $87 million from Park Morton that was due to be given to us for our TOPA and DOPA rights. So it's going in her pocket.
So believe me, I like the idea of lighting the torch. I love the idea of having these types of conversations because when the true DC citizens show up and have these conversations, then we can do something about the leadership. But as long as we allow them to keep us quiet and in the shadows, we don't get to call it out. And Michael, when we talk about our council in the wake of just now having them reconfirmed and one that had to apologize in his reconfirmation, all I could think about as I watched that was we've got to raise the standards.
Yes, Lord.
We're going to get anything different.
Dr. Hamilton, I was wondering, probably one of the agencies, I really like the idea of the audits. Probably one of the agencies you may want to audit, probably top 5 maybe, is the Department of Small Local Business Development.
Absolutely.
Who are they helping and how and why?
Absolutely. And those contracts have been steered. You know, we don't hear a lot about the lawsuits that are coming up. For example, DDOT, when we dealt with this DC circulator situation, right at the same time, we had lawsuits going on for contractors who were steering contracts on the inside and taking the money. And so again, when we don't audit or hold them accountable, it's the stories that we're not aware about that we're being taxed on that we don't realize. Look at how many members in her deputy mayor administration we had to settle lawsuits or deal with sexual harassment realities, or there has to be a standard that we as taxpayers demand. And it seems like they get elected and show up or not show up and start dictating the narrative. And we sit there and watch it knowing that it's flawed. But we don't show up in those voter booths. And that's why it's important to come back and reconnect with the citizens, because the citizens don't even realize that they hold the power. What would it look like if, 30,000 DC citizens showed up and wanted an audit? They pay attention. And the reality is that because the Congressional Committee of Oversight, Housing, Accountability and Oversight oversee our budget and our laws, many of us are not familiar with just what that represents. And so when they talk to us about this national election and who should be in that White House, I just remind people that whether it was blue in the White House or red in the White House, our local citizen lives have not been impacted properly, fairly,
Yeah,
positively.
we see what happens when audits happen, such as DCHA, the Housing Authority.
Absolutely.
Entire cabinets resign, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Look at what
so
happened with DC Youth and Rehabilitation Service. What's the first thing she said when she appointed her interim director? They did an audit, and then they come out and report all of this foul play. Of course, there's a culture. In my opinion, there's a culture in our town that has allowed this pay for play process to exist. When I ran into you, many of the small business owners were complaining because in order to get access to grants, you had to pay someone
Yeah.
in the mayor's administration
Yeah.
to get these applications done. And people are not inclined to really speak up because they don't want to be targeted, because it's not popular to speak out, because it could mean the difference in your livelihood.
Right. Yes, Lord. Come on.
you know,
And
in,
that's
in
about
theory,
Lord, have mercy.
in theory, every year, the council's supposed to do these oversights, which could be a pseudo audit. But when you have a $20 billion budget, and you have 13 people on the council, and maybe 2 or 3 council staff, you're talking about 20 people pouring over this huge thing. So many agencies, it's not happening. The auditing, the oversight really isn't happening. It's so superficial. But let me try, because I'm resonating with a lot what you're saying, Dr. Hamilton. But there's a contrast here that I'm hoping you can help me reconcile. On your RhondaHamilton4DC.com website, I really appreciated what you said about gentrification as sort of a continuation of the colonial project. I think you said, quote unquote, similar to colonialism, gentrification not only usurps local and economic power to newer and offer wealthier residents, but there's also implied class and racial components attached to it as well. And you kind of discussed that. And we know with gentrification, obviously, it's directly connected to displacement, homelessness, housing costs going up. If you can, though, reconcile with me this sort of one solution or reaction to this, because obviously with gentrification, with homelessness, we're going to see an increase in petty crime. We're going to see an increase in thefts. People are pushed to the wall. And what I'm seeing on another page on your site is a response to crime is sort of to let the dogs loose from the police. I mean, in this case, I guess in DC, it's drones, it's drug zones, it's stop and frisk. It's all of these things that disproportionately affect the same people who are being displaced. So can you help me reconcile those two sort of concepts?
I appreciate that, and I love that you are transparent in your feelings of conflict. I want us to understand that as a civilized society and as the nation's seat of governance, we must be the example. The reality, I'll ask a question with gentrification, which is what I ask often. What does gentrification without relocation look like? Because we always associate the gentrification with relocation as if that is the only way to deal with it. I say oftentimes, as a former real estate broker and a current insurance broker, the reality of our schools growing and us having equity growth in our property ownerships and things of that nature should not be a negative thing. But we must be intentional in the preservation of equity, making sure that as we improve in our growth and our neighborhood understandings, that we're not leaving or pushing people out. To do that, we must educate. We must be intentional about educating our citizens and providing access to the resources, which is why it's so important to make sure that the monies that we're allocating are appropriately being done so, and that we're getting the impact that we deserve. Now let's shift gears and let's talk about the downside of this, our populations that are affected or directly affected by this gentrification, because the gentrification approach has not been balanced, has not been intentional, has not made sure to access the families that are immediately being impacted. What's happening is that those frustrations are growing into other behaviors, and so we have this crime. We must not be afraid to set a standard, but we must take comfort in knowing that in setting the standard, we're also accountable in the resources that we're providing. We're also accountable to the equity that we're preserving. We don't want folks to be able to feel that because they feel victimized, it's okay to pull a gun out. There must be a standard. Now, as far as our police are concerned, I just spoke on the Hill a couple of weeks back, both to the police and to the clergy. We must have responsible leadership across the board so that our citizens can understand what we expect of them. We can't be a nation's capital where people are afraid as soon as dark hits. You know, we can't live like that. And the reality is that as much as we have bad actors, we also have a lack of proper education and resources that are happening. So we fall prey to these cycles. Look, I was raised in a DC where I felt pride in going in Ward 1, 2, 3, 8, 7, 6, any day. It didn't matter. And the truth of the matter is our city is becoming sectioned off. We have to get back to living and governing standards that holds our citizens accountable. And if we're properly allocating resources and making efforts to get our folks educated and making sure that the equity preservation is intact, then we can go back to proper and responsible policing. But we can't have that without respect and trust. And that's why I'm about core issue items. So on the surface, I can agree and understand with your conflict, but I'm simply pushing that we get back to a civilized way of operating and accountable leadership so that we can stop questioning when it's necessary for the law to act, right? But when the law acts inappropriately, then they got to be held accountable. And see, I believe that leadership starts from top down. And this current leadership has not been a great representation for these other systems of ours not to run afoul.
I often wonder what the police are actually getting paid for. Because I had a run-in with the cop, not a run-in, but I inquired as to the post office up here on Georgia Avenue, right by Morton Street. I went there today to mail a package, and I pulled up and there was a vehicle in the handicap spot, which is becoming all too common in this city. And these little expensive cars, the Range Rovers and the Teslas and all these things, parking in the handicap spots without a placard and without tags. So when I pulled up and saw that, and the police sitting directly across from it, right in the same parking lot as Sweat DC, and I get out and I say, "Excuse me, officer, I'm just wondering, were you aware that they don't have a placard or handicap tags in it?" He was like, "Why are you yelling?" I said, "I'm not yelling, I just talk loud. You're just taking it that way." And then he kept cutting me off, but then he would gaslight me saying I was cutting him off. And I'm like, you know what? He's like, "I'm going to do you a courtesy and you can park right." Don't do me no favors. I can go to another post office.
Yeah. Let's have a real conversation, because not that that's not one, but let's talk a year or so before that incident happens. Because I mean, I'm a mental health advocate, and like I said, I look at behavior, and no one's off the list, right? Behavior tells us a lot. There was a movement to defund police. I'm sure you heard of it, right?
Yeah.
And regardless of what you're thinking about it, if you're for it or against it, the way that it was rolled out, in my opinion, was very irresponsible. For one, we have budgets and we set budgets. If there needs to be a change or an adjustment, then there needs to be a proper way to do so, right? But because politics were involved, it became a public thing. We're going to defund the police and take money to fix mental health. Now, I know we need to fix mental health, and I want to see that happen. But when you do it so publicly, it almost pits the police against the cause itself. And the reality is that if I am a wife or mother or family member of a police officer who gets up every day and puts that uniform on and goes to police in communities where the mental health resources are short, where the housing circumstances are low, where people are as frustrated as we know our citizens to be, then that is a job where I put my life on the line every day. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to give a pass to someone who's not willing to do their job. And so when you put band-aids on real problems in the Black communities especially, there is an issue with there's no longer an officer-friendly understanding. When I came along, there was an officer-friendly relationship. We've gotten away from that, and the only way we get back to a amicable relationship in our communities with the police is that there has to be respect on both sides. And if we don't have leadership that supports that, then we got to, again, start at the root cause. So I believe that there are relationships in our policing community that we must work on, but there are also relationships in our own communities that we also equally have to hold accountable if we're going to build something that we can all appreciate.
So, Ms. Rhonda, we got to wrap up the show, but how can people, the listeners, the subscribers, and any of the general public, how can they reach out to you with their questions, concerns, and just to have a friendly chat about some of the things that are going on in their neighborhoods?
I like hearing that, and I love that you guys are referencing the Rhonda Hamilton #4dc.com. That is an informational site so that you can begin to become familiar with the things that I believe will help us to be a better DC. And keep in mind, I'm not a yes person, and I don't look for yes people. I'm looking to reconnect with our citizens because I intend to be the mayor for the entire district of citizens and not just the ones that are existing in circles or that have certain zeros behind their name. If we're truly going to fix DC and have it be a city, a capital city where we all enjoy, then we must bring the voices back to the table. And I'm ready to have those conversations. So www.rhonda, RHONDA, Hamilton, 4dc.com is a way you can reach me through my website. 202-486-6037 is one of 4 phones that I carry, and it is my campaign phone, which I will pick up. We've got a host of community events that are going to be coming soon, and I hope that I can send them through to you all so you can get them out to your public. My sole responsibility in my belief of being successful will rest with getting our DC citizens back to the table to talk about these issues and so many more. And then before I go, I'm going to throw salt in the wound and say, when we talk about the council doing audits and so many agencies, I'm going to ask you, would someone, I'll just randomly say, since we don't pick on Mr. White, Trayon White, or Mr. Robert White, Anita Bonds and this Fort Myer construction issue and the dumping of hazardous waste in our river, would these be the type of leaders that we want to help us understand improper understandings in our government agencies and money allocations or contract understandings? We've got to talk about it, and no one can be off the list if we're truly going to build a DC that we can all appreciate. And I'm leading the charge. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Thank you for your time. And I think Shante, are we cutting this off now, or is Pastor Mike coming back?
Not yet.
Pastor Mike got, he do the closing.
I want to thank you, Dr. Hamilton. You definitely can send us. You already know me on social media. I'm always a lot of followers. I always put stuff out there for people to see. So you definitely can send us that. Send it to the People's Voice DC page as well. So we definitely enjoyed this conversation. Actually, after you announced that you were running,
We definitely need to have you back. We have so much more we can talk to you for about 4 or 5 episodes.
I'm looking forward to it. Look, whenever you want to have this conversation, let's have it. Thank you all for your patience again. And thank you. Let's keep this conversation honest. Politics is not popular in our town. Let's change that so that our citizens have the power.
Yes,
Amen.
indeed.
Right on.
That's a good
Amen.
note to go out on right there.
As we go out, I want to remind everyone to be safe. This is our weather for the next 7 days. Tonight and tomorrow it's going to be extremely windy. So please, as we say in church, govern yourselves accordingly. Um, Also, I do want to announce that we at the Rising Voices of Politics are opening up a book club. We're starting up a book club. If you are interested, please join with us. You can see the email Rising Voices DC. You can also send a text to our line. Is The text is at 202-670-9110. As we leave, I'd like to tell all our listeners and viewers thank you. And in honor of the upcoming Martin Luther King Day, I'd like to leave everyone with a video right here. Enjoy your hump day.
Welcome to Kids Academy.
As you know, every year we celebrate Martin Luther King's Day. But do you know that King is the only person in American history, apart from George Washington, whose memory is honored by a national holiday? Why is that if Martin Luther King wasn't even a president? Well, while George Washington created American government, Martin Luther King Jr. made Americans truly united. He fought for equality. Amazing. But he didn't use any weapons. He fought just with words, and he won. It all started in his childhood in Atlanta, Georgia in the 1930s. Mike, that was Martin Luther King's childhood name, had a white playmate. They were best friends till they turned 6 and had to go to separate schools. One day, his friend told Mike that his father demanded them not to play together anymore. Mike was greatly shocked. That's when his parents explained to him about the segregation. It meant that black people had to sit separately from white people in buses and restaurants, use separate bathrooms, and even go to separate schools. White people in southern states thought it was natural to mistreat black people, even after abolishing slavery in 1865. Martin Luther King was angry that white people broke him up with his buddy. Since then, he started noticing inequality everywhere. Once, he was traveling with his dad on a bus, and they were pushed away from seats reserved for white people, having to stand up for 90 miles. Another day, a clerk in a shoe shop required Martin Luther King Jr. and his father to be serviced at the back of the shop. They refused. As that kept happening, King's idea to fight segregation became stronger. Martin Luther King was a bright student. He entered college at the age of 15. Later on, studying at a seminary, he learned about Mahatma Gandhi, a leader from India who fought for human rights in non-violent or peaceful way. In 1955, Martin Luther King started his civil rights activism by helping to organize the bus boycott against racial segregation in buses. All black people in Montgomery, Alabama refused to drive or ride public buses for 1 year. King was put in jail for it, but the peaceful protest ended the segregation in city buses. That was his first victory. In 12 years of his activism, Martin Luther King gave 2,500 public speeches and was in prison 30 times, but he never gave up. More than 250,000 people listened to his most famous speech called "I Have a Dream." that he gave in 1963. Soon after that, American government passed the Civil Rights Act in 1963 that made racial discrimination illegal. And the year after, Martin Luther King won a Nobel Prize for his peaceful stand for equality. Millions of Americans supported Martin Luther King, although some people were against his ideas. He was only 39 when he tragically died at the hands of a villain. However, Martin Luther King's words and peaceful actions changed American society forever. That's why the US government created a national holiday in his honor.
Decades, generations, I don't know, for a very long time. And there's no money out of that.
All right, real quick. If you've ever yelled at your phone like, man, why nobody ever talks about this? Congratulations. This podcast is for you. Welcome to the People's Voice, DC, where the city finally gets the mic. And now, this ain't one of those podcasts where everybody sounds smart, but nobody actually saying anything. We talk real life, DC life. The kind of conversations you have after work, on the metro, or when the group chat gets serious out of nowhere. Yeah, we talk politics, but don't worry. Nobody yelling over each other, nobody reading off cue cards, and definitely nobody pretending they got it all figured out. We're talking housing, money, schools, mental health, culture, faith, purpose, relationships, basically all the stuff that actually affects your life, but somehow never gets explained right. This podcast is powered by Rising Voices of Politics and founded by Reverend Michael Campbell. But listen, you don't gotta be a politician, a preacher, or an expert in nothing to belong here. If you got opinion, questions, or just a story to tell, you already qualify. And the energy, chill, honest, a little funny. Sometimes deep, sometimes light, but always real. Catch us live every Wednesday at 6 p.m. on YouTube and social media. Miss it? Cool. It drops the same night at risingvoicesdc.org, and you can listen anytime on Spotify. So whether you're outside, inside, commuting, procrastinating, or just tired of podcasts that don't sound like you, tap in, tune in, laugh a little, learn something. This is the People's Voice, DC, where the conversations make sense. The people are real,